Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you'll learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And in this episode, Jacqueline and I explore the concept of reframing our experiences and outlook as a way of living a happier and more fulfilling life. We all live a different subjective reality based on our own personal experiences. But because our reality is subjective, it can also be reframed to better serve us. So what does reframing entail and how does it work? When it is appropriate versus when is it just bypassing? And what are some of the practical examples in our own lives that you, our listener, can relate to? We're going to explore this and much, much more in the show. And just a reminder, this is a live show. If you're watching live, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Or call in at 1-800-930-2819, and we'll try to get to your questions in the second half. And we'd love to hear from you, even if you have some ideas for future episodes. So yeah, reach out.
Well, welcome everybody. So the idea of reframe is something that's quite familiar to you and to me, but I'm not so sure that it is to our audience. So when we speak about reframing and the power of a reframe, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, great place to start. You know, I love using an analogy. So I'm going to use this movie projector as an analogy. A movie projector, all it is an apparatus that shoots light out onto a screen. And the image that light makes on the screen is going to be based on whatever frame is put in front of it. Different storyline, different movie, a completely different movie is going to be playing on that screen. In a certain sense, what we're saying is we are a movie projector, and a lot of our lives are framed already. That is, we're shining our light out of a framing that's based on outside influences, such as what school we went to, the culture we grew up in, our family, our religion, groups we associate with, as well as internal forces, which is our emotional reactions, our traumas we had. All of these various things go to create this frame through which we see the world and through which we have our experiences. Now, this is pointing out the reality is that what we're seeing in our reality is subjective. It's going to be different for each person. And from a framing perspective, if that frame that you created for yourself is leading you to have a happy, peaceful, content life, congratulations, you won the lottery. But if you're like me, throughout my life, some of that framing hasn't worked out in that sense, and I've needed to reframe. Maybe I'll pause there and see if you'd add to that.
Well, I'm going to actually ask a couple questions in relation to it, just to help clarify for our audience what we're talking about. Is there a difference then between reframing and perception? Because to me, they sound the same. As I'm listening to you speaking about our frames and how we see the world, what I'm really hearing is how I'm perceiving reality versus maybe how you're perceiving reality.
Yeah, I think those are interchangeable. Framing, perception, subjective reality are sort of three terms that go hand in hand.
Okay. So I have lots to add throughout, but I'm actually going to take the opportunity to ask you a few more questions. When did you recognize, when's the first time that you can remember coming into an awareness that you had the capacity to reframe a given situation and shift your reality?
I mean, there's probably all throughout my life, there's been opportunities. Hey, look at it glass half full, see the positive side. These are all examples of reframing. But I think that where I had a major example of this, which was like a reframing my life in its totality, was as I was coming from recovery from addiction to drugs and alcohol.
I was looking for a little example. You always go big or go home.
Go big or go home. But that's up until then, the concept of reframing, it wasn't a conscious thing. It was just something I was doing. I think it's something we do 1,000 times a day. We're going to reframe our experience a little bit and such that, we can move forward. But I think some of the reframing we're talking about here relates to the much bigger aspects of life that may not be working for us. And so the example I have is when I'm in this process of trying to recover from an addiction, where there's like I can look at my life through the lens of recognizing sort of the horror of the situation, how I've behaved in addiction, the guilt, the shame, the people I've hurt, all the stuff that's happened over those years, and I can move forward in this in that by seeing the world that way and almost being a victim to it. Or there's this opportunity I can totally redesign my life here. I can choose to see this as the biggest opportunity to look at myself, to grow, to understand who I am, and have a whole redesign for living, which is actually the name of the show. So that's a major reframing.
Fair. I think I was looking for a smaller one, and maybe I'll give that as an example, because I think that, well, actually, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, we may or may not reframe 1,000 times a day, as you spoke to, because I think that what needs to happen first in the realm of reframing is an awareness that we actually have the possibility of shifting the way we're relating to our reality. So often we're locked in this prison of, this is my life and it's happening in this way and woe is me, or maybe you're not playing the victim, maybe it's something different, but we don't even have any conscious awareness of being able to shift that. I just got a diagnosis, a terminal diagnosis. My life is over. How could this happen to me? Why me? My husband is leaving me. How, the betrayal. How could he do this? Why me? And there's all of these opportunities to be able to see life through that light. And then I think something happens in each of our lives at some point where a light goes on, and the possibility of being able to actually look at life from a different viewpoint, from a different angle happens. And the only way that can happen is when the observer in us wakes up, or the witness in us wakes up and is able to actually recognize that we have some agency in the way that we relate to life. We might not have a lot of agency in what happens to us, but we have a tremendous amount of agency in how we relate to what happens to us. So for those of you who haven't experienced what Chris has experienced, as an example, like an everyday example of a reframe, I was just thinking as we were starting the show, where is an opportunity to reframe for me pretty consistently? And one of the things that I know I've noticed about myself over the years is, as it relates to my kids, that I can often get trapped in worrying about whether one of them is going to be okay, worrying about them when they're sick, worrying about them in general. And what I've come to really recognize through the help of a really beautiful teacher of mine is there's actually no energy there's no emotion that's less useful than worry. It doesn't do anything. It's just draining. And so oftentimes now, when something happens with one of my children, I'll use my oldest one as an example. Oh God, what if he's smoking too much pot? What if there's an addiction going on there? What if he doesn't get his life back on track? What if? And then all of a sudden I can pause, and it takes practice to do this, but all of a sudden I can pause and say, hey, what if this is an opportunity for you to let go of your need to control what happens? And what if this is an opportunity for your son to find his own way, to build grit, to build resilience, to fall, to pick himself back up, and to learn his own capacity and his own strength. And when I ask that question or reframe my reality in that way, my suffering actually stops almost instantaneously. And there's a vastness that's created where I'm back in the realm of possibility and creativity. And it feels a hell of a lot better than the other.
Yeah, and what you've done there, and so beautifully spoke, is you've reframed something from what started as a problem. Here's a problem that needs to be solved. To here's an I reframe this now to an opportunity to be explored for growth or who knows what. So it's almost moving it from into this sort of creative mode, and it's been presented for both you and your son as in this instance to grow and become better and
100%.
flourish.
Yeah. And I think that there's moments like that as we begin to look at life in a different way, which for me looks like my belief is that everything that happens is for me. And my job in that belief system is to look for the possibility in each experience and ask myself the question, where's the learning for me? Where's the growth? Where do I need to let go? Where is the attachment? And be able to work with it from there.
And you brought something up, this idea that to do that, the observer or the witness, I think you use the word witness, needs to be present. And one of the things the witness will, as the witness awakens or the witness becomes present, is to recognize, for the first place, I'm seeing life through a frame. I'm seeing life through a set of beliefs, a set of rules, a set of way things should be, through an identity that I'm not even sure where a lot of it came from. Some of it may be mine, but a lot of it's come from, what I've been taught in school and what our society does. I'm seeing life through this particular lens. And the reality is it's not true. The reality is that every single person on earth has had a different experience. So they're looking through a different frame, seeing the same things, and calling it something different.
Well, and you can see that that's where a lot of the conflict in the world actually comes from, because we are living within the frame of our experience, within the frame of what we've learned through the parenting we received, through the generations of parenting that we've received, because it doesn't just come from one generation, through what we've been taught through religious institutions, through medical establishments, through schools, etc. And each party sees things their own way, and two different people will never experience reality the same way, because we're not experiencing reality. Reality would be truth. We're experiencing simply a subjective version of what that reality is.
Yeah, and the biggest challenge is that a great deal of people, maybe the majority of people, don't necessarily recognize that what they're seeing is subjective. It's not objective truth. And if you go forward through life saying that what I see is the truth and everybody else, what they're seeing is wrong and I need to correct them, it's missing this idea that no, we're just seeing through our own frame. None of it's actually true. None of it's real. And that creates this a massive amount of openness and compassion and understanding for, I wonder how that other person may be seeing the world, and how can that inform me how I'm seeing the world? Maybe together, if we share our subjective realities, we can get closer to what is the truth.
It's interesting. Something you just spoke sparked something for me, which is this. I've always been triggered by righteousness as it relates to, I know it's this way. And it's always put me off. And you actually just highlighted for me why that is. Because that's one way, but it may not be my way, right? So I really appreciate that. I think that there are many different places where reframing is a really powerful tool. Within our version of what health looks like is definitely one of them. Relationship is a huge one. Are there others that you can think of just off the cuff?
I mean, you say the word relationship and we think with each other, but in relationship to everything is what we frame. I think those are the two big ones that we should explore. But before we get there, I want to ask you a question. Why do you suppose it is people frame in the first place and want to hold on to their frames?
Mhm. Well, I think that from a brain standpoint, there's immediately something comes to mind, which is the amount of information that comes at us on a consistent basis through our senses is so beyond our wildest imagination that in order for our brain to actually process, it needs to weed out that which it doesn't think is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that in a lot of ways, the teachings that we receive originally around what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to, what's important and what's not important, actually feed an unconscious weeding out of information. So we perceive reality, we don't actually experience reality. But there's a bigger question there, which comes beyond that, which is more of a psychological question, which is my frame or my version of reality, my subjective reality, may be experienced as subjectivity to you who doesn't actually live in my body and experience it. But for me, it's truth, right? Until I'm aware
That's right.
that it's subjective, it is truth for me. And you questioning it or you calling it into question actually will wake up my sympathetic nervous system so quickly to defend or attack because that is my world. And you questioning it is poking holes in something that I can't even fathom because my very foundation is built upon these ideas. And, it's interesting because for me in my own body, and I know that it's true for many, and so many of you listening may have experienced this yourselves. Our experience of what happened during COVID was a really powerful wake-up call for me around my own reality and my subjective reality. And so is coming into relationship with you, which I'm imagining is not that common for all of you. Coming into relationship with Chris. But what happened is that one, COVID woke up a lot for me around what I believe to be true and not true around our medical establishment, around what I believe to be true and not true in terms of our government and whether or not they were actually working on for us or against us. It brought a lot, it started to wake something in me up that actually began to question. And you coming into my life and talking to me about history also at first put my back right up against the wall. I mean, you should have seen some of our original conversations or heard them because it was like I went into major protective mode because Chris started to challenge many of my beliefs by calling them into question. And my first response was to attack or shut down. But what I started to realize was that a lot of the things that I held to be true, I was told were true. Mm-hmm. I never actually questioned. I never thought to question my teachers in school as they were teaching me history. They were teaching me truth. I never thought to question my parents as they were teaching me right from wrong. It was right from wrong. That was it. And maybe I was really impressionable. Or maybe that's most of our experience is that when we're young, we're actually, and as we age, but particularly when we're young, we're looking to be pointed in particular directions. And when people in authority point us in those directions, we think that they're truth. So the idea of why is it so challenging to question that or to actually even to look at our subjective reality is that the very essence of how I look at my world and how I experience my world is through all of those lenses. And if I remove one of those lenses, my world no longer looks the way it did. And that's pretty scary for most of us.
Yeah, and the way you describe that, there's a growth element in it. It's almost like as you're maturing and as you're growing up, going from kid to adult, you sort of need to believe your frame to feel safe. And there's another analogy that comes with this idea of framing and reframing, and that's a house. You know, you have a foundation, and then you frame your house on it. And so as we're building ourselves up, we're creating this structure that's keeping us safe and keeping us sheltered. And you know, we want to believe in the solidity of the structure. So in fact, we don't really want it challenged. We don't want to know there's something wrong with it. And so even as we become older and it's time to maybe start challenging some of these beliefs and asking questions for ourselves, we don't want to because we found safety in this thing. It's working for us. And to question any part of it would mean maybe we have to question all of it. So we have this real, you know, the ego is a survival based mechanism. The observer sort of sits above it. The ego, left to its own devices, does not want to question any of its beliefs, and it will fight for its beliefs because it believes that's its survival.
True. You know, it's interesting as you use the analogy of a house, something else comes up for me, which is this idea that no, we don't want the foundation of our house challenged. And the foundation, you know, all of the frames that we build around our house are built to protect the beliefs that we have. Mm-hmm. And so when somebody comes knocking on our door or trying to force our window open to tell us that what's inside is actually faulty, we want to fight, which is why curiosity is such an important component of this. What came up for me as you were speaking was this idea of reframing. Reframing is something that we choose, and it's a practice. But the way that it happens, where we don't actually have to be faced with the need to defend or protect, is here. I'll follow your analogy. So I have this house and I've lived in it forever, and there's boxes everywhere and all kinds of things which represent all of the stories that I've told myself and all of the ways in which I see the world. And one day I'm going looking for something. I'm going looking for proof of my version of reality. So I'm going looking through all these boxes in my attic, and I push these boxes out of the way. And all of a sudden I see a window, and I see a window from my house that I've never seen before. And from that window, from the height in that attic and that window, I see reality in a different way. And all of a sudden there's an opening. There's an opening to experience the world differently. And I share that because this is not a pounding. It's not, you can't go up to somebody who sees their reality in a given way and tell them it's wrong. In the same way, nobody can come up to you and tell you yours is wrong. But in relating to each other with curiosity, in creating a space where curiosity is actually the undercurrent of a conversation and listening is present, we can create an expansiveness that creates malleability, flexibility, an openness that when met with a question, can create some possibility for varying viewpoints.
Yeah. And it's this idea that's like the ego is always seeking to win and to be right because its survival depends on it. The witness consciousness, the higher self, it just wants to understand and curious because it's actually trying to gravitate towards what we call the truth.
And what we begin to experience in our own bodies as we embody that with other people is this awareness that we all see the world really differently. And a capacity to be able to take somebody in. And when I say take somebody in, I mean hear somebody. And rather than being reactive to what they're speaking, be able to actually hear behind their words the reality or the subjective reality that they're living within. And then we get to appreciate the way that they see the world because it's different than ours.
Yeah. and in that too, and the more we explore that, and the more we begin to recognize that, we have our own subjective reality, and in this, recognizing that actually none of it's true. It's just our subjective reality. And I'm certainly not, it's certainly be a real challenge to understand someone else's subjective reality when I know mine's not true. And it's hard enough just to even understand myself and where this reality is coming from. But the more you realize our own's not true, the more we recognize other people's realities is not true as well. And so we can work together.
So you say that like it's an obvious thing.
Right.
Like, my view of the world isn't true. Well, how do I ever come to a place where I actually begin to recognize that my view of the world isn't true?
How do you get there?
I'm asking because I've been, I've lived in this world since I was a really young teenager, watching my mom rework her world through illness and watching her do neurolinguistic programming and other things to shift her version of her view of reality, or trick her mind into seeing reality differently. But really, like, you look at our teenagers as examples who think that
they know everything.
Their view is the view, end of story, and we are wrong. And there's no way to get in there. What is that place of waking up to be able to actually begin to experience our version of reality not being truth?
I'm going to quote Carl Jung because it relates to my experience, and that's really all I know, is there's no coming to consciousness without suffering. It's almost, and I don't know if this is a built-in mechanism, we've touched on other episodes, but something has to happen in my life where my version of reality leads me to a very unexpected place that's so painful that I'm forced to look at it really carefully from the observer and recognize that what I think is going on in my head isn't fitting with what's actually now happening. It's objectively, there's a real discrepancy here.
So what I'm hearing in that, which I think is brilliant, is that, and I think it's actually quite true in my experience anyways, is that in being brought to a place of extreme discomfort or suffering, we are actually given an opportunity to take on some agency, and shift our experience of what's happening, because we are unable to shift what's happening outside of us.
Beautifully put. That's right.
So all of a sudden we are given agency to shift what's happening inside of us. And when that happens, we wake up.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, you mentioned earlier about how when we first met, we had these, have this really interesting conversation with these divergent views. What's fascinating for me is about a year before that, I shared all the same views you had, but I had started coming to this place of questioning absolutely everything about a year before.
Yeah.
And it was right in that zone.
Yeah.
This might be a great place to take a break.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll be back with you shortly. Okay.
All right, welcome back. Before the break, Jacqueline, you're talking about reframing has been part of most of your life, and a lot of that came from your earlier childhood with your experience with your mom and her health. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was 13, I think I was 13, my mom was diagnosed with colon cancer, and up until that point, my mom's identity had really been tied to her desire to be a mother and become a mother and to be a wife. And she hadn't really connected with the depth and breadth of who she was beyond those roles. And she got really sick, and something happened through the sickness that woke up the person inside of her that I think I'd probably speak to as her soul, waking up and going, hey, what about what we came here to do? You're forgetting. You've identified with these other two roles, but what about you? And she went through a really interesting process, which I have to say, quite honestly, at the time, felt like my mom was going crazy a little bit. She all of a sudden went from, you know, doing everything that everybody else was doing to doing everything that she was doing, which was really different than what everybody else was doing. And she stopped following the status quo and started following her intuition and a different kind of wisdom. And that was a pretty incredible thing to experience as a very sensitive kid, because I was conscious of everything that was going on. And it was almost like I was absorbing it by osmosis as I was watching her. But I remember when she started learning neurolinguistic programming and really getting to experience both then through her and then later in my life through my experience in psychology and some neurolinguistic programming, the power of our words and how they impact our feelings and how they impact our existence. And I watched, I have a memory that I'll never, ever forget. When someone receives a cancer diagnosis, especially a terminal one, not my mom's, I'm thinking of somebody else's. We don't, at least not then, it wasn't that common to step into this place of like, if I shift my thoughts and I shift my vibration or frequency, I may be able to actually heal myself. That was insane. But that's what my mom was doing. And I can remember as she started working with clients, I remember being upstairs in the kitchen and I think I was baking and I could hear drumming. And she had a little boy at the house who had a brain tumor. And they were stomping like they were in a marching band going, Mr. Tumor, go away, Mr. Tumor, go away. And they were doing all of this visualization to reframe illness into something that this little boy could actually impact. And from that point forward, and, my mom's journey continued and my journey with her continued, but from that point forward, something in me really shifted, which was this real awareness that the way I hold reality will actually impact the way I experience reality. And that's my experience of reality is all that matters. We have this, on my 40th birthday, my girlfriends made a shirt for me. And the shirt was a picture of me as a little girl jumping up and down in a crib. And it said, excuse my language, but when life hands me lemons, I make chocolate cake and leave those bitches wondering how I did it. And I think that's truth for me is life has handed me many different experiences. Many have put me in a really privileged place, and many have been harrowing and incredibly painful. But my ability to be able to shift my reality by shifting the way that I look at what's happening has been the biggest gift that I have. And it showed me that I and each one of us has the capacity to really embody what it means to be a true warrior. And a true warrior isn't all about fighting. A true warrior is willing to be incredibly uncomfortable and turn toward the things that are uncomfortable and work with transformation to shift them, to change them, to grow from them, rather than to have our experiences define us. We get to define us. And I know that you had an experience, Chris, which really just came up as I was speaking, that you spoke about the reframe that happened for you through addiction. But I remember you sharing with me an experience with your mom that actually was also incredibly transformational for you. And it really was a powerful reframe. I'm wondering if you'll share that with our audience.
Yeah.
Do you know what
I know what you're talking about now. And that's a good, wow. That was actually the first biggest meaningful reframe I've had in my life. So the backdrop is my mother was a pretty severe alcoholic from my earliest childhood, and she then passed away when I was around 29 years old. And in that period of being raised an alcoholic with an alcoholic mother, I constantly had resentment, anger towards her. How could this person choose to put alcohol in front of me? And I always came second. And she wasn't like the other moms. All of these things, all this sort of anger and resentment that built to the point that when she passed away of complications related to alcoholism, I felt numb. And it's like I didn't have an emotional outburst. I didn't know what I felt. I remember I went to work the next day. I found out while painting an apartment, I just kept painting. I was in this really strange place of not knowing what to do. And I was looking at her through this lens of anger, disappointment, abandonment, all these things. And so that gets all stuffed down. And 20 years later, when I'm going through my own crap, I'm gone away to a wellness center. Looking for a reframe in a sense, because I'm going to go try things now that I've never tried before. Psychics, crystal workers, a shamanic healer. So I had my first session with a shamanic healer. And in this session, and I'm going to get you to suspend your disbelief for the moment. Just believe that I believe. My dead mother embodied the shamanic healer. His eyes rolled back in his head, and I'm literally having a conversation with my mother from somewhere else. And it was a detailed conversation. Like, I'm going to share some with you now, that she said, listen, I was 17 or just turned 18, but I was 17 when I had a baby, and it was a small town, and they sent me away to a different town to have the baby because I was such an embarrassment to my mother. It was all full of shame. And then I was whisked off to a different city with my young husband to go to finish high school there. Away from everybody so no one could see, full of shame. And even when I finished university, put my husband through law school with a baby, I was still shamed as the unwed mother, the teenager that got pregnant. And she felt this shame her whole life. And she turned to drinking. And even in her drinking, nobody came to help her. Nobody really confronted the problem. For her whole life, everyone just watched and let her drink herself to death. No one put her in her treatment center. No one said she had to stop. And in that moment, it's like the reframe happened. I'm looking at this person as the villain, and all I see is this poor little girl having a baby and getting just swept away in life and not knowing how to cope or deal with any of it. And that's how she died, knowing her kids probably didn't understand her and hated her and not showing up to who she wanted to be. And everything in my life changed at that, because I reframed the whole situation. And I felt so much love for my mother in that moment. And I continue to hold her in a totally different place. But then it allowed me to realize a couple main things. One, the way I'm seeing situations with my subject view, it was entirely wrong there. How many others was I seeing wrong? A lot showed up to me that day. And then my other change, there's a spirit world, which I didn't recognize. So that was a big mind-blowing one for me there too. But that was the big reframe from my life. And it has had a profound impact on the way I relate to absolutely everybody now, because I don't know their story. And I know all of my assumptions of why that person is doing these things are just from my own point of view. And I don't know.
It's interesting, when I asked you the question, I wasn't actually asking you about that piece. And I'm so grateful that you shared it. But it also it's speaking to me of something really important, which is that something opened there for you that had been shut, but it didn't end there, because the next time you ended up in a treatment center, your step coach had something else to say to you about your mother, which again shifted you dramatically. So it was like, that's where I was going
Oh
originally.
my God, it's so funny.
So it's like, and I'll ask you to share in a sec, but what I'm hearing in this is that our subjective reality is actually so strong that, it's like a hole gets poked in it and we begin to see the world in a different way. But there's more holes that need to get poked before we can let go of that reality. So why don't you share with these guys what that wonderful step coach said to you that day, because it comes in a little bit of a different vein around your mom too.
Yeah. And, and just a bit of a background of that, this was the second treatment center I went to in a short period of time. And in the first one, I came out of there, and I think I mentioned in other podcasts, like I've done all this work and I'm almost wanting the world to give me a ticker tape parade because I hadn't been drinking for 30 days and I'd done all this work, but I felt like I was such a victim to the world still. And I felt like, it's my mother's fault or someone else's fault that I'm drinking and all these other people to blame. And within one day at this new place I went to, the step coach, Susie, she's a feisty Irish woman. I started saying something. She just looked at me and she says, "You're still blaming your dead mother for your problems? Grow the fuck up." And it, like, at that moment hit me like, yeah, I better grow up. It was just like, it was instantaneous.
So it was almost like your heart softened to your mom the first time, but it was the second time where all of a sudden you woke up and recognized that you had agency, right, which goes back to what we were saying originally.
Yeah. And the whole story then I told myself from that point on changed, that I'm responsible. I made all these decisions. I got myself here, and I can certainly get myself to a different place.
Yeah.
You said something really interesting that I wanted to come back to in terms of, this reframing with respect to health, but I think it applies to everything. We're getting into, to the aspects of why reframing works. Like, one sense is, okay, I'm gonna, see the situation differently for how I relate to it, and I'll feel better inside. I'll feel different inside. I can come to a place of peace and happiness versus anger and resentment. That's true. But it's also our actual consciousness and commitment to seeing the world that way allows the world to evolve that way. Mm-hmm. That's a very quantum physics type approach to the world, which is, quantum physics is, the probably the most up-to-date science on reality. That's how quantum works. The observer and the observed are completely related. There's no separation. So if we choose to view the world through a lens of, say, unconditional love, forgiveness, and acceptance, that is ultimately the world we're going to create and we're going to see. And that can actually all transcend all the way to healing ourselves, which many people have had success doing through consciousness and through the mind. And that's a great reframe.
So I think that it's worth bringing this up now, because we were speaking about it before the podcast, and I hear you speak that. And, if unconditional love is what we feel and what we walk with and what we live with, and it's what we create, for a lot of people, that could be really airy-fairy. It can sound really hokey. And I know that lots of people, in having conversations with us, have challenged us around spiritually bypassing. And I would love to have a little bit of a conversation around why what we're speaking about is actually the opposite of spiritually bypassing. And I think I'll start, actually. Yeah. Maybe you can poke some holes.
See where you're going here.
What we're speaking about, this whole idea of living with unconditional love, as an example, it could sound like an airy-fairy concept in a world that is so fraught with war and hatred and anger. I think it is one of the most powerful and challenging positions to hold in a world that is not unconditionally loving. It's choice. Each of the things that we're speaking about are actually, they require conscious choice. And the only way that we can make a conscious choice is to have a witness that is awake, an observer that is awake, that recognizes that we are not our thoughts, that we are that which is watching our thinking. and that we have the power to alter our reality. It doesn't mean not feeling pain. We're all going to experience pain in this lifetime. It's part of being alive. We're all going to experience suffering in this lifetime. It's part of being alive. But at a certain point, what happens is that we wake up to the fact that we actually are able to control how much we suffer and how much we don't. We're not able to control how much pain we experience, but we can control how much suffering we experience in relation to the pain. Because suffering is so tightly tied to resistance to what is. And it's not resistance to subjective reality, it's resistance to truth. Do you want to take it from there?
Well, it's a tough place to take it from. but you know, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. So that pain is required to raise our consciousness. And all our suffering, ultimately, at the end of the day, in this realm of, we're talking about what is objective truth. And the objective truth is we're all connected. We're all related. We're all one massive entity of consciousness. And all our suffering comes from this firm belief that we are separate. And if we believe that our subjective reality is the only reality that's true, we believe we're very separate and very alone in this world. And that's going to create a tremendous amount of suffering. And it's the awakening from that and recognizing that my reality is my own, someone else's reality is their own, is the first step in getting to a place where I can unconditionally love the next person. Because I'm recognizing that just like I was asleep, caught in my own subjective reality, thinking I was separate, thinking this was the right way and everyone else is on the wrong way, that person doesn't know. They haven't woken up to that yet. They don't know that their subjective reality is an objective reality. So how can I begrudge them? How can I resent them? How can I be angry at them? All I can do is love them until they come to this position.
And your capacity to be able to do that is tremendous. I watch it all the time. What I see in that is that in your experience to unconditionally love yourself through your experience, you now have the capacity to be able to open the doors. And so you become, in essence, actually, when we get there, we become that window that I spoke about earlier that creates a vastness, a container that's bigger than the foundation of that house and the walls of that house that we were speaking about originally, which then gives this person that you're speaking of, hypothetically speaking, the capacity to extend beyond those walls. And listening is a really big piece of that. By your being able to hold a space of being unconditional and hearing them unconditionally, you create an expansiveness for them to be able to grow into.
Absolutely, because you think about it in terms of this framing and in terms of this sort of structure. If you sit with somebody who's just in this process of really trying to question things, and they present the way they see the world, and the first thing we do is jump in and tell them it's wrong, immediately going to go in defensive mode, immediately feel attacked, and if anything, going to entrench into that viewpoint, which is a lot of what we see in the world right now. Two sides going at it, hammer and tongs, no one listening to each other, both trying to prove that their subjective reality of the world is correct, and both of them are completely wrong.
There's so much righteousness in that. And the piece about telling somebody that they're wrong, that is so faulty, is that what actually needs to wake up within each of us is our intuitive capacity, which taps us back into truth. Mm-hmm. It's not about what we know. It's not about our intellect. It's not about what we're taught or told or what books say. It's actually about coming back into an experience of reality that goes beyond all of it, goes beyond the mind.
Yeah.
And there's no right and wrong there. There just is there because it's the vastness of everything.
And there's just a seeking to understand and be curious.
Yeah.
There's no room for right or wrong anymore.
Yeah.
Those are sort of abstract concepts at that point.
Yeah.
But speaking of abstract concepts, we're getting abstract.
I know we are.
I want to come back to, like, with the time we have left, what are some tools that can help our listeners start a reframing process? If what we said here is interesting and you sort of get the gist of, hey, there's a different way to view the world, if the way I'm looking at it's not working, where do I start?
There's a couple of things that I'll mention and then I'll turn it over to you. First off, I would say that one of the easiest ways to be able to begin to work with this is to look at Don Miguel Ruiz's work in the 4 agreements and the 5th agreement. He really breaks down through those agreements and helps us to recognize that we are living a subjective reality, and then helps us to step into a different version of that reality. So that's one, for sure. And it's a simple one. And it's, for those of you that are interested in the quantum world, it speaks in a language that is not that. So for, I'll say, me and any of the rest of the dummies out there that don't make that quantum physics doesn't quite make sense to you yet, Don Miguel Ruiz's work is really powerful. I also, a really simple reframe, and it's one that, we use in our house all the time, is when you use the words, I have to, or I should, or I need to replace them with I get to, or I choose to. So things that are simple, like, you'll hear me often in our house say, I have to go and drive my daughter somewhere. And Chris will very quickly say, you have to? No, I get to go and drive my daughter somewhere. And, maybe that can sound a little bit airy-fairy or hokey, or even like bypassing a little bit. But I will tell you that the difference that I feel in my body when I go from, I have to take Layla across town, to I get to go and spend 30 minutes with my daughter, is profound. My nervous system responds entirely different, and my experience in the car with her is vastly different. Can I turn it to you?
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that, because I think those are the 3 words that will change your life if you can be consistent. From I get to, so from I have to I get to. That'll have such a profound experience in your life if you're able to continue using those for a number of months. 4 agreements, for sure. It's like a book about reframing now that you've talked about it. One of our earlier podcasts, we talked about something called the drama triangle, which is when we're recognizing we're playing one of these roles of I'm a victim, or I'm a persecutor, villain, hero, rescuer, recognizing I'm at that place. That's a perfect time to reframe and saying, those aren't going to serve me, those roles. I want to be a creator, I want to be a challenger, and I want to be a co-creator or a coach. And that little reframe of like, okay, no, I'm not a victim. I create my own life. And just saying that out loud and moving yourself there energetically, again, have profound impact.
So just to jump on that, anytime that you find yourself suffering, anytime you find yourself feeling like there's no way out, is a time for you to be able to engage in a reframe. That reframe itself will open those doors and give you agency in terms of how you relate to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something else I'd add too, it's called the 4 levels of engagement. Again, it's another tool. And there's sort of 4 ways we can respond to things happening or relate to them. The first is just drama. He said, she said, it's a, who do I blame? It's a place of powerlessness. The next one, number 2, is this situation. Okay, I see there's something here that needs to be solved. I'm not going to blame. I'm going to solve. I'm going to jump in and take some action. And that's great. But in a sense, it's still seeing the world as problems to be fixed or problems not to be fixed. If we want to shift to a more embodied state and reframe it to an embodied thing, I have to ask myself, no matter what's going on, hold on a second, who do I choose to be here? How do I choose to relate to this situation? And just like, maybe I might choose to say, I want to choose to be compassionate, kind, and I want to try to come from a place of unconditional love. I'm going to go in with that mindset and we'll see what happens. And the last is the big one. The big one is no matter what's happening, I'm going to ask the question, no matter what's happening, how bad it gets, what is the opportunity for me here? What is trying to happen for my benefit? And really try to reframe the entire situation to come up with a solution on that one and go with that one, because things will work out much better if I do.
And to end, I guess, just with that last piece of what's the opportunity for me here is where this whole idea of, I can't remember who said it anymore. The idea of the biggest question that we have to answer in this world is, do I live in a benevolent universe? Because if I live in a benevolent universe, then every experience that I have is an opportunity for me to grow. And from that standpoint, I can reframe anything and become an agent in my own creation.
Yeah. And I thought you said that because you said that to me in my first yoga class.
So yeah, it wasn't me.
Wasn't you? Okay.
No. With that, I think we will end here. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you in a couple weeks.
Bye now. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.